The bright studio lights made Jake Morrison squint as he walked across the stage. The audience was huge, filled with beings from dozens of different worlds. He could see the tall blue Cetarians in the front row, their 4 eyes tracking his every move. Behind them sat a group of Vorthon merchants, their scaly green skin catching the light. Even some of the rare crystal beings from the Outer Rim had come to watch the show. Jake wore his dress uniform, the dark blue fabric, crisp and clean. On his chest hung 2 sets of identification tags. The newer ones were made of advanced polymer, standard issue for all Space Corps officers. But right next to them hung an older pair, made of simple metal and worn smooth by decades of handling. These belonged to his father. Zara Wispwind stood at center stage, her purple skin glowing under the studio lights. She was famous across the galaxy for her talk show. Every week, millions of beings tuned in to watch her interview important people from all corners of civilized space. Today, she had chosen to feature humanity and their recent victories in the border conflicts. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications," Zara announced, her voice carrying easily through the massive studio. "Please welcome Commander Jake Morrison of the Human Space Corps." The applause was polite but not enthusiastic. Jake had expected this. Humans were still newcomers to the galactic community. Most species saw them as crude and primitive, barely advanced enough to be considered civilized. Jake took his seat across from Zara. The chair was designed for humanoid forms, but he could tell it had been adjusted for someone taller. His feet barely touched the floor. "Commander Morrison," Zara began, flashing her trademark smile. "Thank you for joining us today. I understand you recently returned from the neutral zone?" "Yes, ma'am. My unit completed a 6-month deployment there last week." "And how many conflicts did you participate in during that time?" Jake thought for a moment. 17 separate engagements. Most were small skirmishes with pirates or raiders. Nothing too serious. A ripple of surprised murmurs went through the audience. 17 battles in 6 months was considered extremely high activity for any military unit. Zara leaned forward, her expression showing mock concern. "That seems like quite a lot of violence for such a short time. Tell me, do humans always solve their problems through fighting?" Jake kept his face neutral. He had been warned that Zara might try to make humans look bad. "We fight when we have to, ma'am, when peaceful solutions don't work." "I see." Zara's eyes moved down to his chest, focusing on the metal tags hanging there. "And what are those primitive ornaments you're wearing? They look quite old." Jake's hand moved instinctively to the tags. "These are identification tags, ma'am. Military issue." "But you already have proper identification built into your uniform," Zara pointed out. She gestured to the modern polymer tags. "Those are readable by any scanner in the galaxy. So why do you also wear those crude metal pieces?" The audience began to chuckle. Jake could see several beings pointing at his chest and whispering to their companions. "The metal tags belonged to my father," Jake explained. "He was a soldier, too." "Ah, so they're sentimental keepsakes," Zara said, her voice dripping with condescension. "How quaint. But don't you think it's rather barbaric to wear the identification of dead soldiers like trophies?" The laughter from the audience grew louder. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice steady. "They're not trophies, ma'am. They're reminders." "Reminders? Of what exactly?" Zara pressed. "Of humanity's violent past? Of your species' inability to evolve beyond primitive warrior customs?" A Cetarian in the front row spoke up loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Humans still think they need metal tokens to prove their worth. How pathetic." The comment drew more laughter and several nods of agreement from the audience. Zara smiled wider. "It does seem rather backward, doesn't it? Here we have a species that's supposedly advanced enough for space travel, yet they cling to barbaric military fetishes from their homeworld." Jake's hands clenched in his lap, but his voice remained calm. "Ma'am, these tags represent something important to human soldiers." "Oh, I'm sure they do," Zara replied mockingly. "But surely you can see how ridiculous it looks to the rest of the galaxy. We have beings here who can manipulate matter with their thoughts, species that have transcended physical form entirely. and yet humans need little metal trinkets to feel secure. The audience was eating it up. Jake could hear beings from different species making jokes in their native languages. A group of hegemony diplomats were openly laughing at him. Perhaps, suggested a Vorthon merchant, humans wear these tokens because they know they're physically inferior to most other species. It's a way to compensate for their weakness. The comment brought the loudest laughter yet. Even some of the camera operators were grinning. Zara nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting point. Humans are rather small and fragile compared to most galactic species. Maybe these primitive rituals help them feel more important than they actually are. Jake stood up slowly. The studio fell quiet as every eye focused on him. He could feel the weight of millions of viewers across the galaxy watching through their screens. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "would you like to see what these primitive rituals actually represent?" Zara blinked, caught off guard by his sudden change in demeanor. "I'm sorry? You seem to think these tags are just meaningless symbols," Jake continued. "You believe human military traditions are barbaric and outdated? Would you like me to show you what they really mean?" The studio was completely silent now. Zara looked uncertain for the first time since the interview began. "What exactly are you suggesting, Commander?" she asked carefully. Jake's eyes never left hers. "Come with me to the neutral zone. See what human soldiers and their barbaric trinkets can do when the galaxy needs protecting." The silence stretched on for several long seconds. Then Zara laughed nervously. "That's quite an invitation, Commander, but I'm just a talk show host, not a war correspondent." "Then send your cameras," Jake replied. "Document what you think you'll find. Show the galaxy how pathetic and weak humans really are." His voice was calm, but there was something in his tone that made even the largest beings in the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. Zara looked around the studio, suddenly, aware that her usual routine had taken an unexpected turn. Zara stared at Jake for a long moment. The studio remained quiet except for the soft hum of the recording equipment. She had interviewed thousands of beings over her career, but none had ever challenged her like this. "You're serious," she said finally. "You actually want me to come to a war zone?" "The neutral zone isn't a war zone," Jake replied. "It's a patrol area. My unit runs regular security sweeps there, standard procedure. And you think this will somehow prove that your primitive customs aren't ridiculous?" Jake's expression didn't change. "I think it will show you what these tags really mean to the people who wear them." A Cetarian in the front row called out, "This is absurd. Why would anyone want to watch humans stumble around in space?" The comment brought scattered laughter from the audience, but it was nervous laughter. The mood in the studio had shifted. What started as light entertainment was becoming something else. Zara looked toward her producer, who was standing behind the cameras. The small alien made a gesture that Jake couldn't interpret, but Zara seemed to understand. "Commander," she said, turning back to him, "even if I agreed to this ridiculous proposal, what would be the point? Military patrols are boring. My viewers want entertainment, not footage of soldiers doing routine maintenance." "Then you'll get boring footage," Jake said simply. "Unless something happens." "And what if something does happen? What if there's actual danger?" Jake touched the metal tags on his chest. "Then you'll see why we wear these." The audience was getting restless. Beings were whispering to each other and some were starting to leave their seats. This wasn't the kind of show they had come to see. Zara realized she was losing control of the situation. Her show worked because she could make her guests look foolish while keeping the audience entertained. But Jake wasn't playing along with her script. "Look," she said, trying to regain her authority. "I appreciate the offer, but I have a show to run. I can't just disappear into space chasing after human soldiers." "1 week," Jake said. "That's all I'm asking. 1 week to show you what human military service really means." "And if I refuse?" Jake shrugged. "Then your viewers will know that you're too scared to back up your words with action." The insult hit home. Zara's purple skin darkened with anger. In galactic society, calling someone a coward was one of the worst things you could do. "I am not scared of anything," she snapped. especially not some primitive human military exercise. Then prove it. The two stared at each other across the stage. The cameras captured every second of the confrontation. Jake could see the calculation in Zara's eyes. She was weighing her options, trying to figure out how to save face. Fine, she said finally. I'll do it. But I'm bringing my full camera crew, and I want complete access to document everything. Agreed. And when this turns out to be a complete waste of time, I want you to come back on my show and admit that human military traditions are outdated nonsense. Jake nodded. And if something does happen, if my people prove themselves, then you admit, on galactic television, that you were wrong about humans. Deal. Zara extended her hand. Jake shook it firmly. The audience burst into surprised chatter. This wasn't how these interviews usually ended. Most guests left looking embarrassed or angry, but Jake looked calm and confident as he walked off the stage. 3 days later, Zara stood in the docking bay of Orbital Station 7, watching her crew load equipment onto the human frigate USS Liberty. She had spent the last few days researching human military history, trying to understand what she had gotten herself into. What she found confused her. Humans had only been in space for about a century, but they had already fought in dozens of conflicts. They seemed to seek out trouble wherever they went. Their casualty rates in battle were higher than any other species, yet they kept volunteering for the most dangerous assignments. Captain Lisa Hayes approached her as the loading continued. The human woman was tall and lean, with short brown hair and serious eyes. She wore the same type of metal tags that Jake had shown on the television program. Ms. Wispwind, Captain Hayes said, "Welcome aboard the Liberty. I hope you understand that this is a working patrol vessel, not a luxury cruise ship." "I understand completely, Captain. My crew and I are prepared for basic accommodations." Hayes nodded. "Good. Commander Morrison briefed me on your arrangement. You'll have access to most areas of the ship. But there are some restrictions for security reasons." "Of course." "There's something else you should know," Hayes continued. "The neutral zone has been more active lately. We've had reports of increased raider activity in the outer sectors." Zara felt a small chill of worry. "What kind of raiders?" "Pirates. Mostly. Sometimes smugglers. Occasionally we run into something more serious." "More serious how?" Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Last month, a civilian transport went missing near the border. We found pieces of it scattered across 3 different systems. The attack patterns suggested Void Reapers." Zara's skin went pale. Every being in the galaxy knew about Void Reapers. They were nightmare creatures that harvested other species for food and raw materials. Most civilized governments had standing orders to avoid them at all costs. "Are you saying we might encounter Void Reapers on this patrol?" "Probably not," Hayes said. "They usually stay in the deep void between systems, but the neutral zone is a big place. You never know what you might find out there." Jake Morrison appeared at the top of the loading ramp. He had changed from his dress uniform into practical field gear. The metal tags were still visible on his chest, but now they were accompanied by body armor and weapons. "Captain Hayes," he called down. "We're ready for departure when you are." Hayes turned back to Zara. "Last chance to change your mind. Once we leave the station, we're committed to the full patrol schedule." Zara looked around the docking bay. Her camera crew was already aboard the ship, along with enough equipment to document everything that happened over the next week. Backing out now would make her look like a coward to the entire galaxy. "I'm not changing my mind," she said firmly. "Let's see what human soldiers are really made of." As the Liberty pulled away from the station and headed toward the neutral zone, Zara had no idea that her decision would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. The metal tags that she had mocked on her show were about to prove their worth in ways she could never have imagined. The USS Liberty moved through space like a metal shark hunting in dark water. For 3 days, Zara and her camera crew had followed the human soldiers through their daily routines. She filmed them eating simple meals, maintaining their weapons, and running training exercises in the ship's small gym. It was exactly as boring as she had expected. "This is ridiculous," she told her lead cameraman, a quiet hegemony citizen named Vex. "They're just doing normal military stuff. Where's the story in that?" Vex adjusted his recording equipment. Maybe that is the story. These humans seem very ordinary. Zara watched through the camera viewfinder as Jake Morrison cleaned his rifle in the ship's armory. He worked with calm precision, taking apart each piece of the weapon and checking it carefully. The metal tags on his chest caught the eye light as he moved. "They're not proving anything," she muttered. "Just a bunch of people playing soldier in space." Captain Hayes appeared beside her. "Finding what you expected, Ms. Wispwind. Your crew is very professional, Captain. But I'm not seeing anything. That explains why humans think they're special." Hayes smiled slightly. "Maybe that's because nothing has happened yet." Before Zara could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in the corridors and a voice came over the communication system. "All hands to battle stations, this is not a drill. All hands to battle stations." Hayes was already moving toward the bridge. "Stay with your camera crew," she called back to Zara. "Don't get in the way." Zara followed her anyway, with Vex close behind carrying his equipment. The ship's bridge was small and cramped, filled with screens showing tactical displays and sensor readings. Jake Morrison stood at the main tactical station, his face grim as he studied the data. "Report," Hayes ordered as she took her command chair. Long-range sensors picked up a distress signal from the civilian transport Harmony's Dream, Jake said. "They're carrying 2,000 passengers on a scheduled run to the Kepler colonies." "What's their situation?" "They're under attack. Single large vessel, unknown configuration. The transport's shields are failing." Hayes studied the tactical display. "How long until we reach them?" 18 minutes at maximum speed." "And how long do they have?" Jake checked his readings again. "Maybe 10 minutes before their shields collapse completely." Zara moved closer to see the screens. Even she could understand the basic tactical situation. A single dot representing the transport ship was being pursued by something much larger. The transport signal was getting weaker as she watched. "Can't they outrun their attacker?" she asked. Hayes shook her head. "Civilian transports aren't built for speed. They're sitting ducks against a military vessel." "But you said we're 18 minutes away. They'll be destroyed before we get there." "Not if we can distract their attacker," Jake said. He turned to Hayes. "Captain, request permission to take a boarding party and hit the enemy ship directly." Hayes stared at him. "Jake, we don't even know what we're dealing with yet." "Sensors are picking up more data now," called out the ship's communications officer, a young woman named Kate Price. "Captain, you need to see this." Hayes moved to her station. "What do you have?" Kate's face was pale. "The attacking vessel matches the profile of a Void Reaper harvester ship, Class 7, approximately 800 meters long." The bridge fell silent. Zara had heard enough about Void Reapers to know that they were among the most dangerous predators in known space. They hunted other species like animals, harvesting them for food and raw materials. "A Class 7, Hayes said quietly. "That thing outguns us 20-1. "Which means we can't fight it directly," Jake agreed. "But we might be able to board it and disable their weapons from the inside." "That's suicide, Jake. Void Reapers are twice as strong as humans and 3 times as fast. You wouldn't last 5 minutes on their ship." Jake's hand went to the metal tags on his chest. "Maybe. But those civilians don't have 5 minutes either." "Wait." Zara found herself speaking up. "Wait. You're seriously considering boarding an enemy ship that's 20 times more powerful than yours?" Jake looked at her. "Those people are going to die if we don't do something. But it's not your job to save them. You're just on patrol." "Actually, it is our job," Hayes said. "Human Space Corps regulations are very clear. We protect civilian shipping in our patrol areas regardless of their species or origin." Zara stared at them. "Even if it means getting yourselves killed?" Jake was already moving toward the armory. "Kate, send a message to the transport. Tell them help is coming." "Hayes, I need 6 volunteers for the boarding party." "You've got them," Hayes replied immediately. "Pick your team." Within minutes, Jake had assembled his boarding party. 6 human Marines in full combat armor, carrying weapons and equipment designed for close quarters fighting. Zara and Vex followed. Them to the shuttle bay, cameras recording everything. "This is insane," Zara said as Jake checked his equipment one final time. "You're going to get everyone killed for a bunch of strangers." Jake looked up at her. "You asked what these tags mean," he said, touching the metal pieces on his chest. "They mean that sometimes you have to stand between innocent people and the things that want to hurt them. Even when you know you're going to lose. Especially then." The shuttle bay doors opened to reveal the Void Reaper ship in the distance. It was massive and organic looking, like some prehistoric sea creature turned into a spaceship. Weapons fire flashed between it and the civilian transport, which was barely holding together. Jake's team climbed into their assault shuttle, a small armored craft designed for boarding actions. Zara and Vex squeezed in behind them, cameras still rolling. "Remember," Jake told his team as the shuttle launched, "we're not trying to destroy their ship. We just need to knock out their weapons long enough for the transport to escape." "And then what?" asked one of the Marines, a tough-looking man named Carlos Webb. Jake's smile was grim. "Then we try to get out alive." The shuttle accelerated toward the Void Reaper ship. Through the small windows, Zara could see the alien vessel, growing larger and more terrifying. Its hull was covered in organic growths and weapon ports that looked like hungry mouths. 30 seconds to contact," announced the shuttle pilot. Jake and his team made final checks of their equipment. The metal tags on their chests clinked softly against their armor as they moved. Zara realized she was holding her breath. In all, her years of interviewing people, she had never seen anyone willingly walk into certain death for the sake of strangers. But these humans were doing exactly that, and they seemed almost calm about it. The shuttle shuddered as it made contact with the enemy ship's hull. Cutting tools began slicing through the alien metal, creating an entry point for the boarding party. "Here we go," Jake said quietly. "Remember what we're fighting for." As the hull breach opened and the Marines prepared to enter the nightmare ship, Zara finally began to understand what those simple metal tags really represented. The inside of the Void Reaper ship was like stepping into a living nightmare. The walls pulsed with a sickly green light, and the air smelled of death and decay. Strange organic growths covered every surface, making wet sucking sounds as the humans moved past them. Jake led his team through the narrow corridors, following the ship's layout on his tactical display. Behind them, Zara and Vex struggled to keep up while recording everything. The camera shook as Vex tried to navigate the slippery floor. "The weapon control center should be 3 levels up," Jake whispered into his radio. "We need to move fast, before they detect us." The team moved in perfect formation, each Marine covering a different angle. Their boots made soft squelching sounds on the organic floor. Zara had to fight not to throw up from the smell. They reached the first junction when Carlos Webb held up his hand. Everyone froze. In the distance, they could hear something moving toward them. Heavy footsteps and a low growling sound that made Zara's skin crawl. Jake pointed to a side passage and the team quickly moved into cover. Moments later, a Void Reaper warrior stalked past their hiding spot. The creature was huge, nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and skin like black leather. Its mouth was full of razor-sharp teeth, and its claws could cut through metal. Zara watched through her camera as Jake waited for the creature to pass. His hand rested on his rifle, but he didn't move to attack. The metal tags on his chest caught the green light from the walls. After the Reaper disappeared around a corner, the team continued moving. They climbed through maintenance shafts and crawled along service tunnels, avoiding the main corridors where more enemies might be waiting. 2 more levels, Jake said as they reached another junction. That's when everything went wrong. A Void Reaper dropped from the ceiling directly onto Marine Pete Russell. The creature's claws ripped through his armor like paper. Russell screamed and fired his rifle point blank into the alien's chest, but it barely slowed the monster down. The rest of the team opened fire immediately. Energy bolts filled the narrow corridor as more Reapers appeared from hidden passages. These creatures had been waiting for them. "Move! Move! Move!" Jake shouted, firing rapidly at a Reaper that was charging straight at him. The creature took multiple hits but kept coming. At the last second, Jake rolled aside and the alien crashed into the wall behind him. Carlos Webb threw a grenade into a group of 3 Reapers. The explosion sent pieces of alien flesh flying, but 2 of them survived and kept attacking. Webb's rifle clicked empty and he switched to his sidearm, continuing to fire even as claws raked across his armor. Marine Susan Kelly took a hit that sent her sprawling. Blood ran down her face from deep cuts, but she kept shooting from the ground. Her metal tags were soaked red but still visible on her chest. "The mission," Jake called out over the sound of weapons fire. "We have to reach the weapon controls." 2 more Marines went down under the alien assault. The corridor was filled with smoke and the screams of both humans and Reapers. Zara's camera captured it all, the lens shaking as Vex tried to keep filming, while staying alive. Jake and the 2 remaining Marines fought their way toward the next level. Behind them, Pete Russell was still moving despite his wounds. He had lost his rifle but was using a combat knife to stab at any Reaper that came close. "Russell's down bad," Carlos shouted. "We need to get him out of here." "Negative," Russell called back, his voice weak but determined. "Complete the mission. I'll buy you time." Jake's jaw tightened. "Pete, that's an order. Fall back with us." "Sorry, Commander, can't do that." Russell pulled out 2 grenades and held them up. The Reapers saw what he was planning and tried to reach him, but he was already pulling the pins. "Tell my wife I kept the promise," Russell said, touching his metal tags one last time. The explosion shook the entire ship. When the smoke cleared, Russell was gone, but so were 6 Void Reapers. The path to the upper levels was open. Jake stared at the empty corridor for a moment. His friend was dead, but there was no time to mourn. The civilian transport was still under attack. The remaining team reached the weapon control center after fighting through 2 more groups of Reapers. Marine Kelly had taken so many hits that she could barely stand, but she kept her rifle ready. Carlos had lost his helmet and blood ran down his face from multiple cuts. The control center was a nightmare of organic technology and harvested body parts from dozens of different species. Zara had to turn away from her camera when she saw what the Reapers had done to their victims. Jake moved to the main control console. It was covered in writhing tentacles and pulsing growths, but he could see the weapon targeting systems underneath. "Carlos, watch the door. Kelly, help me figure out how to shut this thing down." "How long do we have, Boo?" Kelly asked. Jake checked his radio. "The transport's shields are almost gone. Maybe 2 minutes." Working together, they began cutting through the organic growth covering the controls. The ship's weapons were powered by some kind of biological generator that fed on harvested energy from other beings. Jake found the main power coupling and began placing explosive charges. "This should shut down their weapons for at least 10 minutes, he said. "Long enough for the transport to escape." "What about us?" Carlos asked. Jake looked around the control room. More Reapers would be coming soon. His team was down to 3. People all wounded and running low on ammunition. "We do our job," he said simply. He activated the charges. The explosions tore through the weapon systems, sending sparks and alien blood flying. Emergency lights began flashing throughout the ship as the Reapers lost their ability to fire on the civilian transport. Through his radio, Jake heard Captain Hayes' voice. "Transport Harmony's dream is clear and moving to safety. All 2,000. Passengers are safe." Jake smiled despite the pain from his wounds. The metal tags on his chest were dented and stained with blood, but they were still there. "Mission accomplished," he said. Then the Reapers found them, and the real fight began. 3 weeks later, Zara sat in her studio facing the same cameras that had recorded her mocking Jake Morrison's dog tags. But everything was different now. The studio was packed with beings from across the galaxy, all waiting to hear what she would say about what had happened in the neutral zone. The footage from the Void Reaper ship had already been seen by billions of viewers. Vex had kept filming even as the final battle raged around them. The galaxy had watched Jake Morrison and his team fight their way out of the alien ship, carrying their wounded and leaving no one behind. Jake sat across from her now, his left arm in a medical support brace and fresh scars on his face. The metal tag still hung on his chest, dented and stained but still visible. He had refused the medical team's suggestion to replace them with new ones. "Commander Morrison," Zara began, her voice much quieter than before. "3 weeks ago you challenged me to see what human military traditions really meant. I think it's fair to say that I learned something unexpected." The audience was completely silent. Even the camera operators had stopped their usual chatter. "Would you tell our viewers what happened after you disabled the Reaper ship's weapons?" Jake's eyes were steady as he answered. "We fought our way back to the shuttle. Marine Kelly was badly wounded, so Carlos and I had to carry her. The Reapers kept coming at us, but we had accomplished our mission. The civilian transport was safe. But you almost didn't make it out alive." "That's true. We lost 2 good people on that ship. Pete Russell and Maria Santos both died protecting innocent civilians they had never met." Zara looked down at her notes, but she already knew what she wanted to say. The prepared questions seemed meaningless now. "I mocked you on this program," she said finally. "I called your military traditions barbaric. I said those metal tags were primitive trinkets worn by a backward species." Jake didn't respond. He just waited for her to continue. "I was wrong," Zara said, her voice carrying clearly through the studio. "I was completely wrong." The admission sent a ripple of surprise through the audience. Zara Wispwind had built her career on never backing down from her positions. "You asked me what those tags represent," she continued. "I thought they were symbols of humanity's violent past, but after watching your team on that Reaper ship, I understand now. They represent something I had never seen before." She paused, looking directly into the main camera. "They represent the willingness to die for strangers, to sacrifice everything, for people you will never meet who will never know your name. Most species in this galaxy have evolved beyond such behavior. We consider it primitive and wasteful." Jake's expression didn't change, but his hand moved slightly toward the metal tags. "But I watched 6 human Marines board a ship that should have killed them all," Zara said. "They did it to save 2,000 civilians from 30 different species. They didn't ask what planet those people came from or whether their governments were allied with humanity. They just saw people in danger and acted." A Cetarian in the front row called out, "But they failed to save their own people. 2 humans died needlessly." Zara turned to face the audience member. "No, they didn't die needlessly. They died keeping a promise." She stood up and walked toward the audience, something she had never done before in any of her interviews. Pete Russell could have retreated with his team. Instead, he stayed behind to hold off the Reapers so his friends could complete their mission. Maria Santos took 3 fatal wounds but kept fighting until the civilian transport was out of range. They died because they valued the lives of strangers more than their own safety. The studio was completely quiet now. Even the Cetarian who had spoken up was listening intently. "I have interviewed generals and admirals from dozens of species," Zara continued. "I have spoken to warriors who conquered entire star systems. But I had never met anyone who would willingly die to protect people they didn't know, from species they had never encountered." She walked back to her seat and sat down across from Jake. "Those metal tags aren't primitive trinkets. They're a promise that whoever wears them will stand between innocent people and the darkness no matter the cost." Jake finally spoke up. "That's what my father taught me. He said that being a soldier isn't about fighting. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves." "Your father who died on Kepler 442b? "Yes, ma'am. He was defending a colony of mixed species when the Krillian raiders attacked. He could have evacuated with the civilians, but he stayed to buy them time to escape." Zara nodded slowly. "And he passed those tags to you, along with the promise they represent." The audience was still silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. Instead of boredom or amusement, there was something like respect in the air. "Commander Morrison," Zara said, "I owe you an apology. I owe your entire species an apology. Humanity isn't primitive or backward. You've maintained something that the rest of us have lost." "What's that?" "The understanding that some things are worth dying for." Jake touched his father's tags one more time. "Not dying for, ma'am. Living for. The promise isn't about death. It's about what we choose to do with our lives." As the interview ended and the cameras stopped rolling, Zara realized that everything had changed. The footage from the Reaper ship was already spreading across the galaxy, and humanity's reputation was shifting from primitive newcomers to something much more significant. Within days, recruitment centers across human space were overwhelmed with volunteers. Young humans lined up for the chance to earn their own metal tags and join the ranks of those who kept the promise. But it wasn't just humans who were inspired. For the first time in galactic history, members of other species began requesting to serve alongside human military units. They wanted to learn what Jake Morrison and his team had demonstrated in the depths of that nightmare ship. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the most advanced civilizations were the ones that remembered the oldest truths. That honor meant more than technology, that courage was more valuable than superior firepower, and that a simple metal tag could represent something more powerful than any weapon ever created, the promise to stand between the innocent and the darkness, no matter what the cost.